The scene in Alberta last night as Danielle Smith led a smaller UCP caucus back to power. What will the future hold for Smith, and what about Alberta NDP leader Rachel Notley? I want to bring in the power panel on that. Vanguard Strategy CEO Michele Cadario. Shakir Chambers is a principal with Earnscliffe Strategies. Francoise Boivin is a former NDP MP and a political commentator. And here with me in Calgary, the CBC's Jason Markusoff and the Calgary Sun's Rick Bell. All right, Rick, I want to start with you. Yesterday, you predicted 50 seats for the UCP. There's 49 of them. Where do you think this leaves Danielle Smith?
By the way,
forward?
With a recount, there's recounts.
You could be right.
Hoping for the 50. I want to get it right on.
But you're wrong today, Rick. No, I'm just kidding.
Wrong today.
Yeah, but
I know. I was off by one.
Where do you think it leaves Danielle? Where do you think it leaves her? I mean, is she going to face a challenge to her leadership, or does she get to govern clean for a few years?
I mean, obviously in Calgary there were significant problems.
Yep.
The NDP did not get enough to win government, but they won seats. Other seats they almost won, and even in the real deep blue seats, the winning margins were down, and they shrank. So, I mean, I think I walked into the Big Four just as her speech was starting, and I was talking to a MLA, or they may be a former MLA at some point soon, but an MLA who said TBA really, I'm not going to use the word he used, hurt us in Calgary. And I don't think he meant just take back Alberta. I think he meant that whole sort of wing of the party hurt them in Calgary. So she didn't mention, I don't believe, in her speech, I don't think she mentioned Calgary, but there's obviously some work to be done there. And I think a lot of the people that were at the celebration were people who were with her at the leadership. Right. And those people have to be told at some point, this is a big tent, mainstream, moderate conservative party, and you're not going to get everything you want. I'll yell and scream at Trudeau, and then you'll be happy, as happened in the speech. That got them all excited. But they're not going to, they can't get everything they want because that's just not where Calgary is at. And you talked about the three-legged stool. That's not where that leg of the stool is at.
Yeah, no, she kind of won with a one-legged stool. But, you know, Jason, you wrote today about how Danielle Smith was able to stick with the message track, you know, throughout the campaign. What Danielle Smith is Alberta getting for the next 4 years? Will it be the Danielle Smith we saw for the last 4 weeks?
If I knew that, I would have put that answer in the column. I just
you're saving it for the show, you know.
Yes. I just raised a question. But there's a reason this is worth asking. I mean, every politician, you sometimes get different pivoting when you're running for leadership, and then you're running for the mainstream election. Then you have 4 years or so of runway to enjoy. Danielle Smith, it's been stark. It's been unusually stark for her, more stark than I've almost ever seen with a politician. She promised a whole bunch of things during her UCP leadership race that she quickly abandoned. The idea of giving, adding to the Human Rights Code the right to be unvaccinated. She went hard on the Sovereignty Act and then kind of dropped it off the face of the earth. I mean, in your interview, she said, "Oh, I may use it one day. Who knows?" Yeah. She talked about these health spending accounts. Went hard about pension. You know, pulling Canada out of Alberta out of the Canadian pension plan, and kind of walked away from that. So that was a pretty quick pivot to the mainstream because she knew that she needed to appeal to people she wasn't appealing to in the leadership race. And now that she has them all in control, and there is this now a more rural caucus and this group, Take Back Alberta, and these hardcore conservatives who were holding their nose while she was doing some more moderate, more almost pinko things in their view.
Pinko means a different thing in Alberta, I think. It doesn't
in the Alberta hardline conservative context. Let's calibrate that to that mean. But they're going to want her to do certain things. And actually, it's interesting. And Rick kind of alluded to it. The thing that does unite all those groups is bashing Ottawa. Ottawa. She got the biggest cheers by far for that stuff, more than the I have to govern for all Albertans. So we'll see if that's going to be enough for that group.
Right, yeah, I'm old enough to remember when the Sovereignty Act was a thing. You know, it was going to be the #1 priority, and now it's kind of shoved aside during the campaign.
I don't know if you had hair at that point.
No, I didn't have hair. It's not that long ago. But Michele, I wonder about what this does for the federal-provincial relations now. You saw her with the warning to the federal government last night. There is going to be a serious conversation about an emissions cap, you know, to help the federal government meet its climate reductions and climate change targets, and she's made it very clear she's out to protect the Alberta economy at all costs. So how do you see this going forward?
Well, I'm not sure that the most constructive relationship is going to be built on the foundation that they have. So it remains to be seen. But, you know, I think in some senses, you know, as these guys said, Ottawa is a natural foil for her, and it's actually a unifying kind of factor behind her leadership for her province. And on the other side, for Prime Minister Trudeau and the federal Liberals, they actually have a foil in her as well now, because there's going to be, especially on the issue of climate change, they're going to be talking about that. There's some real hard discussions that have to happen, and they're obviously going to be battling up. And it's going to be interesting to see where Poilievre ends up in that mix, because he's going to have to expound one way or the other. And, can the Alberta policies that he might want to support Smith with, are those winning policies for those crucial suburban seats in and around Vancouver and in and around Toronto, which is kind of key to them for the next election campaign. So, I think that there's some really interesting politics that we're going to see over the course of the next little while. And probably some huge fights on the policy level. I'm not sure that there's a point where they're going to be able to come together and agree on emissions caps and fighting climate change.
So, Shakir, what, if any, impact does this have on the federal Conservative movement, on the national Conservative movement? We did see Pierre Poilievre come in late and endorse Danielle Smith. He congratulated her today in a tweet. But, he hasn't really aligned himself with Doug Ford, for example, where he needs to win. And, Danielle Smith says things that are controversial in places like Ontario. How does it play?
Yeah, I'm not sure it has much impact. I mean, I would assume that Pierre Poilievre would support the Conservative in Danielle Smith in Alberta, just like Stephen Harper did. So I think it's more about what does he put forth, in those 905 regions that where they care about the environmental policies. Is he going to do something, or is he only going to talk about kind of oil and gas, where it doesn't really have too much relevance to folks in Ontario? So I'm not sure there's a massive impact for Pierre as he moves forward. It's really about how he shapes these policies moving forward, again, on the environmental front. But I would say one thing to what Michele said. I think the biggest thing here is that on the policy side for the federal Liberals, I mean, listen, they're going to obviously have some roadblocks from Danielle Smith, but I think politically, as you head into an election, the federal Liberals have shown they're very okay using premiers as kind of these, look at what the Conservative premiers do versus what the federal Liberals want to do. I think there's going to be a lot of that. I don't think there's going to be a lot of alignment between Trudeau and Danielle Smith moving forward. And I think politically, the Liberals are probably pretty happy for that moving forward.
Francoise, what do you make of this result for the NDP, for Rachel Notley? She says she's going to stay on as the leader of the official opposition. What do you see as the future of the NDP in Alberta?
I think the future still looks good. I mean, they still has, and they will boast about that, even though I'm sure the loss, because a loss is always a loss. Whatever the amount, it is a loss. So you try to find the positive in it. And here the positive is the number, the fact that they added, 15 seats to their previous result. But at the same time, you have to remember, at some point in time during the campaign, I was listening to an interview with Danielle Smith, and she was playing like she was the underdog because everybody said she would lose the election, except Rick, of course. But anyway, so for her, it's like, hey, it's a miracle. It's fantastic, and that was pretty much her first sentence. But for Rachel Notley, I think the fact that they are the biggest opposition that ever was in Alberta, if it's true as a statement, probably gives her a bit of time. I mean, I know that the NDP is not a party that gets rid of its leaders after one loss, not even after two losses. But at the same time, they will have to reflect on having de la relève, somebody to come in. Not now, though, because that would be the biggest gift for Danielle Smith, who's still to this day pretty scripted, well scripted, followed the script during the campaign, but will have to continue doing so if she wants to have a smooth sailing leading the province. So they need that Rachel Notley be there still for a bit and not having the NDP deciding on a future leader. So that might come closer to the end of the actual mandate that has been given. So they will play it strong. Right. The UCP won't not have a free ride, and it's a strong opposition, and we'll see.
Yeah, well, Tom Mulcair might quibble with your analysis about NDP leaders not getting ousted after a loss, but it certainly applies.
He just couldn't count his support. That's it. He didn't know how to count.
But Rick, I certainly think Rachel Notley probably has definitely earned the right to choose her own path on this sort of thing. But where do you think this leaves the NDP, right? I mean, the largest opposition in history, a big chunk of the vote. But, if Rachel Notley couldn't beat Danielle Smith with all of the controversy swirling around her, is this the ceiling for the NDP, or can they take that leap if, down the road?
Well, I mean, you look at people they might be considering to replace Rachel Notley. I don't see anybody who has that sort of star appeal right now.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I think they have to do some real soul searching about who they are. What is the NDP? Some people said their messaging was, could have been a lot stronger in the campaign. I mean, they were very strong about Smith.
Sure.
Not quite as strong about their own message. But they have a base that is New Democrat. But then they have a lot of voters because they've managed to unite everybody who is not a conservative. And in Alberta, that includes a lot of people who are not socialists, who are not social democrats, who are not NDPers. They are liberals. They could be attracted to the Alberta Party in the past, and they could be red Tories.
Right.
So they have to decide, I think, just as the UCP under Smith has to decide who they are and what they're going to do, I think the NDP has to figure that out as well, because it's not enough to be an old school NDP in Alberta and win. She also has to have that big tent and see where that goes. And a lot of people in her base, I think Jason might agree, were complaining that she went a little bit too far to the center. So there's going to be, I think, a lot of discussions about who the NDP are as well as who the UCP are.
Right, so Jason, is that where we are, the United Conservative Party and the United Not Conservative Party? That's sort of the dynamic in Alberta going forward?
We'll see. I mean, this whole formation in Alberta politics is only 2 elections old.
Right.
Things could shift, and things have shifted. 3 elections ago, neither party really existed for all intents and purposes, but for like the 10% that the NDP got. They weren't even door knocking on the eve of election in Calgary back in 2012. So things could shift. Maybe there's this post-Notley reckoning. I mean, I do figure that Notley will not contest a 4th election. Maybe not quite the Mulcair classic exception to the rule, but I don't know if she's going to be like Andrea Horwath in Ontario, right, constantly losing. I mean, I think it's weird to see 1-2, 1-1, lost 1, still going. I think that there's going to be some reckoning and some transition period within the NDP. And within the UCP, who knows? There is, it is a very fractious party. Both sides were kind of holding their nose, sticking with Danielle Smith, the hard lines, hoping that she would maybe come back to them. And those moderates and people in urban Calgary who either lost or won, who kept hearing in their ear how people didn't like Danielle Smith. We like you, we don't like Danielle Smith. So there could be some kind of realignment in Alberta politics. I'm not going to say it's the Alberta Party, this centrist thing that's almost the party of perpetual tomorrow and just never shows up. Right. But maybe there's some kind of realignment. Maybe there's a fracture on the right. Maybe there's a fracture in the center. The fun thing is we have 4 years to figure that all out.
Right, yeah, and the other thing with Rachel Notley, like the job is just exhausting. Politics is hard on people, right? And Michele, after a certain period of time, your internal battery just drains. And we've got a prime minister who's going to be seeking a 4th mandate with this changing political landscape at the provincial level. You've got Smith here, you've got Scott Moe next door. You have the 4 Atlantic premiers raising concerns about the clean fuel standard and points of friction in those areas. How does Justin Trudeau now need to sort of approach federal-provincial relations after what's happened here in Alberta?
Well, it's with a light touch, It's I don't think that the mandate that Smith got in Alberta is something that he's going to worry about in particular, that has some kind of a lead-on effect in the suburbs of Ontario in the 905, or quite frankly in Atlantic Canada. But at the same time, he is going for a 4th term. And you carry a lot of baggage as you go into that, as I know very well. And it's very difficult and very rare to get a 4th term in Canadian politics. So that's going to be top of mind. And they have to come out with something that's fresh as well. It can't just be him having to defend past policies and past things that he's done, or running on the record of things that they're very proud of. There has to be something new in there. There has to be that energy. and there has to be that new offering so that Canadians, when they're going to the ballot box, are thinking, yeah, you know what, I'm going to give them another go because that's where I like the country to go because there's some ideas there. So it's a tough slull, and the more farther mandates you're into it, the harder it becomes.
Shakir, what do you think this does to the First Minister's table, to the federal-provincial dynamic writ large?
Interesting question. I mean, I think ultimately Smith was already at the table. I think Smith, the Mo Alliance, I think they're going to drive forward on their agenda in terms of these environmental targets are too ambitious too quickly, and we need to slow down a bit. I think Trudeau's going to be hearing a lot of that moving forward. I mean, even in Ontario, Doug Ford is still against the carbon tax. So I think the Prime Minister's environmental initiatives might drag on a bit. But as I said before, the folks that are very pro-ambitious environmental targets, net zero 2050, I think that's going to be a perfect foil for the Prime Minister moving forward as he contrasts what he wants to do on the federal level, what he would say conservative premiers don't want to do, right? Give a crystal clear contrast between his vision and what he says conservatives don't want to do in terms of the environmental policies moving forward.
Yeah, and Francoise, on that particular point, right, there would have been a more, willing ally in Rachel Notley had she won on this one for the federal government. She disagrees with the emissions cap that the federal government is proposing, but not to the idea in general, just one that's a little bit more pragmatic and realistic, whereas Danielle Smith said today, no, we don't need an emissions cap whatsoever. That seems like that's going to be a flashpoint.
It is, and all around the table of the premiers, there's not many allies of Justin Trudeau around that table. A lot of conservative, even in my province, Quebec. You have the coalition Avenir du Québec, which is more leaning toward the right, and but they all say, and Danielle Smith was saying exactly that to you during the interview, they can find some points where they can agree. There are some files that they can agree with. So I think for the Prime Minister of Canada, it will be to maybe settle more those files, the easier one, than go to the jugular right away when he's going to seek a fourth mandate. Because I'm not so sure that it would be a great theme to just say, hey, I'm your superhero and I'm going after all those premiers that you have elected in all those provinces. That would not be very sellable. So I do think that they can find common ground. As she talked about healthcare, she talked about other few files. So I still say that it might not be the Danielle Smith that we're all expecting, us from Quebec anyway, to find politics more interesting in Alberta than in my own province. It might not be as interesting as I thought it would be, but we'll see. Only the future will tell.
Yeah, Manitoba is next, and you got quite an act to follow after this campaign. So, Rick, we're getting near the end of the segment. So,
and it will be interesting.
Yeah,
I don't know exactly how.
Yeah,
Alberta will be interesting.
There's a lot going on in Manitoba. So, I want to ask you, because we're getting near the end, and the loaded question, I guess: what happens now? I mean, we'll wait and see what happens with Rachel Notley. We've got Danielle Smith there, the caucus issues, those things. What do you think is going to happen in the next, 30, 60, 100 days of the UCP government?
I think Alberta politics has never disappointed us, as you know. Every week we're talking about being in the belly of the beast. The belly of the beast is still there. It will continue. There obviously it will, probably lessen somewhat from the election. But I think there's going to be, I don't know about conflict, but I think there's going to be a lot of things shake out for both parties. And again, when you also put in the Trudeau factor, that will also, but it will be very interesting. I think Smith sees herself, whether we agree or not, as having a pretty strong mandate, and she will provide us with all kinds of storylines going forward.
Yep.
But I don't think it'll be exactly the same as in this election.
Jason, just finally, do you think Danielle Smith has done enough to quiet the people who were saying maybe her leadership would be in question even if she won this?
Well, for now, I think with both leaders, I think they're going to have at least half a year, maybe a year, a full year of runway. I mean, I say that, and be careful what you wish for in Alberta politics because we've done a lot of things for sure things, and well.
Today's Jason Kenney's birthday, by the way. He thought the UCP was a sure thing, and look at where we are, right? That's how quick it can change. Yeah, and the barrel of oil went below $70 today. So, surprise, right? That's what they need to balance the budget.
And remember, political parties here, governing parties, throw out their leaders even when they're in office.
No, it is definitely a challenge
different.
to govern here. Rick, I want to thank you for joining us the last 2 days in Calgary. We're going to say goodbye to you after this, but we appreciate it, man. It is always a pleasure. So thanks for doing this.
Likewise.